My husband told me not to come home for Christmas. My boss and his wife will be staying over, he said. So I spent Christmas Eve alone, but just after midnight he called me. Honey, why are you all over the news? Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family member. My husband kicked me out of our house on Christmas Eve, claiming my ghetto habits would embarrass him in front of his wealthy boss. I spent the night in a hotel alone until I checked my hidden home security cameras. There was no boss. Instead, I watched my husband serving my expensive wine to my mother, my sister, her lazy husband, and a blonde woman sitting in my chair. But they did not know I secretly owned the house they were sitting in, and the very corporation my husband worked for. I stood in the grand foyer of our Chicago estate, gripping the leather handle of my suitcase. The heated marble floors offered no comfort against the cold reality of what was happening. Marcus stood blocking the doorway to the living room, with his arms crossed over his chest. "You need to leave before they get here," he said, his voice dropping to that condescending whisper he always used when he wanted to make me feel small. "Mr. Sterling is very traditional, Maya. Your loud attitude and those ghetto mannerisms will ruin my chances at this promotion. I cannot afford to have you making inappropriate jokes or serving cheap food to the senior vice president of Vanguard Financial. You always talk over men in meetings, and you have zero class. Mr. Sterling expects elegance and submission from a wife. You do not even know how to pour wine correctly. I hired a private chef to cater the evening because your cooking is an embarrassment. Just take your things and leave this house right now." I looked at the man I had been married to for 4 years. Marcus was a mid-level corporate director who leased his cars and financed his watches to look wealthy. He truly believed prestige was something you bought on credit. What he did not know was that the estate we lived in was purchased entirely in cash by a blind trust I controlled. He did not know I was not just a struggling consultant working long hours. I was the chief executive officer of Apex Holdings, a firm specializing in ruthless corporate acquisitions. I had spent my entire life being underestimated, first by my own family and now by my husband. I simply nodded. I did not shed a single tear. I did not argue. Arguing with Marcus was like negotiating with a brick wall. It only validated his inflated ego. "Are you sure you want me to walk out of this house tonight, Marcus?" I asked, my voice perfectly steady. He checked his reflection in the hallway mirror, adjusting his collar. "Absolutely. Go, book a cheap motel near the airport. I will call you on the 26th when the coast is clear. Do not text me while they are here. I need absolute focus." I walked upstairs to our spacious master bedroom without a word. My hands moved mechanically as I opened my closet, pulling out a small overnight bag. I packed a silk robe, 2 changes of clothes, and my expensive skincare routine. I did not take any of the jewelry Marcus had bought me over the years, because I knew those pieces were just cheap imitations he financed to look good in front of his friends. The real diamonds, the ones I bought myself with my own corporate bonuses, were already safely locked away in a private vault downtown. As I zipped my bag shut, I caught my reflection in the mirror. I looked calm, composed, and completely detached. The tears Marcus probably expected were nowhere to be found. I pulled my suitcase out the front door and loaded it into my black SUV. I drove straight downtown, but I did not go to a cheap motel. I checked into the penthouse suite at the Ritz. The winter city looked beautiful, but I felt entirely hollow inside. The valet at the Ritz greeted me warmly with a polite smile, taking my keys as the bellhop carried my single bag. The penthouse suite was excessively large for one person, but I needed the space to breathe. I slowly walked across the plush carpets, shedding my winter coat and letting it fall onto an armchair. The silence in the room was a stark contrast to the chaos I had just left behind. The city lights sparkled below me as I poured a glass of sparkling water and opened my laptop on the mahogany desk. 2 months ago, I had noticed discrepancies in our household accounts. There were expensive restaurant charges on nights. Marcus claimed he was working late. I saw charges at luxury boutiques that never resulted in gifts for me. My corporate instincts had kicked in immediately. I discreetly hired a private security firm to install hidden cameras throughout the estate. The cameras blended flawlessly into the crown molding and smoke detectors, providing crystal clear audio and high-definition video of every common area. I logged into the secure portal and clicked on the living room feed, expecting to see Marcus Brown nosing a stiff corporate executive. What I saw instead made the breath catch in my throat. The fireplace was roaring. Christmas music drifted from the surround sound speakers. The dining table was set with my imported crystal and silver. But Mr. Sterling was not there. Instead, my mother, Beatrice, sat at the head of the table wearing a new velvet dress. My older sister, Chloe, the golden child who could do no wrong, lounged on my custom sofa. Beside her sat her white husband, Bradley, nursing a glass of bourbon. Bradley was a serial entrepreneur who had never actually launched a successful business, relying entirely on the financial support I secretly provided to my mother. And sitting right next to Marcus, holding his hand in plain view of my entire family, was a young blonde woman in a stunning red cocktail dress. I sat perfectly frozen, staring at the screen, finally realizing that my entire marriage was a complete lie. Execute the takeover. Now, 3 simple words sent into the digital ether, setting a multi-billion-dollar mechanism into motion. My legal team had been preparing this exact maneuver for 6 long months. Vanguard Financial was vulnerable, over-leveraged, and fully ripe for a total acquisition. Apex Holdings had been buying up their debt through anonymous shell companies, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Marcus assumed I was doing low-level consulting because I never bragged about my work. He mistook my quiet silence for absolute insignificance. He could not have been more wrong about my true capabilities or my hidden wealth. On the laptop screen, the festive atmosphere in my living room continued unabated. Bradley poured himself another glass of my vintage wine, entirely oblivious to the fact that he was drinking the liquid equivalent of his entire net worth. Chloe was laughing loudly, tossing her styled hair, leaning into my mother, who was busy feeding green grapes to his blonde mistress. The sheer audacity of the scene should have broken me, but it only fueled my intense focus. I watched the digital clock in the bottom corner of my screen. 11:58, 11:59. 12, midnight struck. I sent a second text to my media liaison, release the broadcast. In my living room, the television playing a loop of a crackling Yule log suddenly went black. Marcus frowned, tapping the silver remote control with deep irritation. The screen flickered, bypassing the festive display and cutting directly to the global financial news network. A stark red banner flashed across the bottom of the screen with the bold words, "Breaking news alert." Chloe rolled her eyes and complained loudly about the unexpected interruption. Bradley groaned, telling Marcus to fix the television so they could put the Christmas music back on right now. But Marcus was staring at the screen, his thumb frozen over the remote. He worked at Vanguard Financial. He recognized the corporate logo flashing behind the news anchor. The anchor looked directly into the camera, her expression serious. We interrupt our regular holiday programming with historic news out of the financial sector. In an unprecedented midnight maneuver, Apex Holdings has officially completed a hostile takeover of Vanguard Financial. The acquisition, valued at over $4 billion, effectively restructures Vanguard. Entire board of directors, effective immediately. All current executive operations are completely suspended, pending an internal review. Bradley laughed, swirling his bourbon. Wow, Marcus, looks like your bosses are getting bought out by some shark. Hope you still have a job next week. Marcus did not laugh. His face had gone slack, losing its color. He understood corporate structure better than the rest of the parasites in that room. He knew a hostile takeover meant sweeping layoffs, especially at the middle management director level where he sat. But the real devastating shock had not even arrived just yet. The news anchor continued speaking. Apex Holdings has released a pre-recorded statement from their private chief executive officer and new majority shareholder of Vanguard Financial. We take you now to that live footage. The screen transitioned from the news desk to a modern corporate briefing room. The Apex Holdings logo dominated the backdrop. A woman walked up to the podium dressed in a tailored charcoal suit. She adjusted the microphone and looked directly into the camera lens with absolute authority. On my laptop feed, I watched the collective realization hit the room like a physical blow. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her chest in shock. Chloe sat bolt upright, spilling red wine onto the custom upholstery she had just been lounging on. Bradley stopped swirling his drink, his jaw dropping open as he stared at the television. The blonde mistress looked confused, darting her eyes between the screen and Marcus. "Good evening." My recorded voice echoed through the living room speakers. "I am Maya Sterling, CEO of Apex Holdings. As of midnight tonight, Vanguard Financial operates under my direct authority. We will be implementing immediate aggressive restructuring to eliminate dead weight within the company, particularly in the director tiers. Inefficiency and fraud will no longer be tolerated under any circumstances." The crystal wine glass slipped from his trembling fingers. It hit the marble hearth and shattered into 100 pieces. The dark red liquid splashing across the pristine white rug like blood. He did not even flinch at the sound of the breaking glass. He was paralyzed, staring in horror at the face of the woman he had just kicked out of his house, the woman he had called a boring ATM, the woman he planned to manipulate and divorce. "I am the majority shareholder," my televised voice continued, "and Vanguard Financial will now operate with strict accountability." I watched my mother stammer, pointing a trembling finger at the screen. "That is Maya. That is your Maya," she whispered, turning to Marcus in disbelief. Her mind could not process the image of her despised daughter radiating such undeniable power. "How is she on television? What does this mean?" Marcus stumbled backward, bumping into the glass coffee table. "It means she owns my entire company." He choked out, his voice barely a rasp. "She owns Vanguard. She is simply my boss. The absolute highest boss now." The room dissolved into panicked, overlapping voices. Chloe was demanding to know if this was a prank. Bradley was staring at his phone, searching the financial news sites for confirmation. The mistress was edging away from Marcus, sensing the shift in power. I sat back in the plush chair of my penthouse suite, a slow smile spreading across my face. I reached for my glass of sparkling water and took a sip. The trap had sprung, catching them all. Right on cue. My cell phone sitting on the mahogany desk began to vibrate. The screen lit up, illuminating the dark room. The caller ID flashed. It was Marcus calling to beg for his professional life. He would find no mercy here. I let the phone vibrate against the mahogany wood for 3 full rings, before I finally picked it up and pressed accept. I did not say a word. I simply sat back in my plush chair and listened to the frantic sound of my husband hyperventilating on the other end of the line. "Maya, are you there?" he practically screamed, his voice cracking with a high-pitched panic I had never heard from him before. "Maya, please tell me this is some kind of massive misunderstanding. Tell me that was not you on the television just now. Tell me you did not just buy my entire corporation." I swirled the sparkling water in my glass, watching the ice cubes clink against the crystal rim. "It is completely real, Marcus." I replied, my tone flat and devoid of any emotion. "I am the new majority shareholder of Vanguard Financial. Your former boss, Mr. Sterling, no longer has a job, and neither do the rest of the senior vice presidents who have been bleeding the company dry." The silence on his end was heavy, thick with the sudden realization that his entire reality had just collapsed. When he finally spoke, his words tumbled out in a desperate rush of accusations and demands. "How could you hide this from me?" he demanded, his panic quickly morphing into an indignant rage. "We are married, Maya. We are supposed to share everything. You let me pay the utility bills while you were sitting on billions of dollars. You let me worry about my promotion when you could have just handed it to me. You never worried about your promotion, Marcus. You only worried about how you looked to other people. You financed luxury cars and bought custom suits to impress executives who did not even know your middle name. You called me a boring consultant because you never bothered to ask what I actually did for a living. You assumed my silence meant I was beneath you. That was your first mistake." He groaned, a pathetic sound of a man watching his ego disintegrate. Okay, fine, I made mistakes, he pleaded, his voice dropping an octave as he tried to pivot back to his charming corporate persona. We can fix this, Maya. You have the power now. You can save my department. You can make me a senior vice president. Think about what a power couple we could be. We can run this city together. Please, honey, just call off the auditors. Tell them my division is secure. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk as I watched the live feed from my living room on my laptop screen. You still do not get it, I said softly. I did not buy Vanguard to save you. I bought it to dismantle the toxic culture you represent. And speaking of toxic culture, I hope your guests are enjoying the vintage wine Bradley just opened. The line went dead quiet. I could hear the faint sound of Christmas music playing in the background, confirming the audio delay on my security feed was minimal. What are you talking about? Marcus stammered, his voice suddenly trembling with a new kind of terror. What guests? I am here all alone waiting for Mr. Sterling to arrive. He is running late due to the snow. You really should not lie to a CEO, Marcus, I stated plainly. It shows a severe lack of judgment. You are currently wearing your tailored navy blue slacks with the gray cashmere sweater you bought last Tuesday. You are standing there sweating profusely. My mother is sitting at the head of my dining table eating green grapes. Chloe is trying to scrub red wine out of my custom sofa. Bradley is furiously scrolling through financial news on his phone. And sitting right next to you is a blonde junior analyst from your marketing department named Sarah. Marcus physically dropped his phone. It clattered loudly against the hardwood floor. He scrambled to pick it up, his face completely drained of color as he frantically searched the ceiling for cameras. How do you know that? He whispered, his voice breaking entirely. How could you possibly know her name? I own the company, Marcus, I reminded him. I have access to every personnel file, every internal email, and every falsified expense report you submitted to pay for your hotel rooms with Sarah. Did you honestly think you were smart enough to hide an affair from a woman who acquires multi-billion-dollar corporations for a living? I heard a loud scuffle on the other end of the line. The security camera feed showed my mother, Beatrice, shoving her way past Sarah and snatching the phone directly out of Marcus' trembling hands. Maya, listen to me right now, Beatrice commanded, using that sharp, maternal tone she had always used to force me into submission. I do not care about whatever petty squabble you are having with your husband. You need to focus on what matters. We are your family. I sat back, utterly astounded by her audacity. She was sitting in my house drinking my wine, praising my husband's mistress, and she still had the nerve to give me orders. What exactly matters right now, Mother? I asked. Family matters, she declared loudly, ensuring everyone in the living room could hear her righteous indignation. Bradley's startup is struggling, Maya. You heard him earlier. He needs capital immediately to keep his business afloat. Since you have apparently been hoarding all this wealth, you need to do the right thing. In the spirit of Christmas and family, I expect you to transfer $200,000 into Chloe's account by tomorrow morning. It is the least you can do after lying to us all these years. I stared at the screen, watching my mother stand tall and defiant, fully believing she was entitled to my money. A slow laugh bubbled up from my chest, escaping into the quiet penthouse suite. The sound of my own laughter felt entirely foreign, echoing off the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse suite. It was a cold, sharp sound that immediately silenced the panicked chaos on the other end of the line. Beatrice was not used to being laughed at. For 33 years, her demands had been met with immediate compliance, quiet resentment, or silent tears. My laughter was a direct challenge to her supreme authority. I watched her closely on the security feed. She stood perfectly still, gripping Marcus's phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. She quickly shifted her tone, swapping the aggressive demand for a sickly sweet layer of maternal disappointment. Maya. It breaks my heart to hear you act this way, she began, her voice dripping with calculated religious guilt. God blesses us so that we may bless others. You have clearly been given a massive financial bounty, and it is your duty to lift up your flesh and blood. Your sister is struggling, Maya. Bradley is trying to build a legacy for their children. You have no children to provide for. What do you need all that money for anyway? It is selfish to hoard your blessings when your family is sitting right here praying for a miracle to save our home. She had one hand pressed to her chest, playing the role of the pious, concerned matriarch to absolute perfection. She did not know I could see the greedy glint in her eyes, or the way she checked the screen to ensure the call was still connected. I remembered being 16, working double shifts at a local diner just to buy my winter coat, while Beatrice emptied our meager savings to send Chloe on a European school trip because the golden child deserved to see the world. I remembered paying off my mother's mortgage when I got my first corporate bonus, only for her to claim she had won the lottery to her friends. That same entitlement was radiating from her, now amplified by the sudden realization of my actual net worth. She genuinely believed that my money belonged to her by divine right. I minimized the video feed window and opened a new tab on my browser. I logged into my private wealth management portal using my biometric security key. The screen loaded, displaying the complex web of accounts I maintained. I navigated directly to the dependent trust section. Maya, are you listening to me? Beatrice demanded, her patience already wearing thin. A good daughter does not ignore her mother when she is speaking. I am listening, mother, I replied softly, my voice betraying zero emotion. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I clicked on the primary joint account, tied to the platinum credit card, currently resting inside her designer handbag. It was the card she used to fund her country club lunches and spa days. The screen prompted me to confirm the cancellation of all associated lines of credit. I clicked confirm without a second of hesitation. The line went red, indicating the account was permanently closed and frozen. I scrolled down to the monthly automatic transfer labeled Chloe Living Expenses. It was a $5,000 monthly stipend I had been paying for 3 years under the guise of an anonymous corporate grant just to keep her from begging me for cash. I highlighted the recurring payment rule. Delete? Confirm. It was done. Finally, I found the auto-pay authorization for Bradley's luxury vehicle. He loved to brag about his leased Porsche at family events, claiming it was the fruit of his entrepreneurial labor when I was footing the bill. I canceled the auto-pay and triggered an immediate notice of default to the leasing agency. What exactly are you doing? Beatrice snapped, sensing the sudden shift in my silent demeanor over the phone. You need to wire those funds right now. Bradley has investors waiting, and Marcus's little situation with his company means you owe us this stability to make up for the immense stress you are currently causing. I leaned closer to the microphone built into my laptop. I do not owe you a single thing. I stated, my words slicing through the digital connection like a scalpel. For years, I have paid the heavy property taxes on your home. I have funded Chloe's lavish lifestyle so she could pretend to be a successful social media influencer. I even paid for the exact bottle of wine you are currently drinking. But you just sat at my dining table and toasted to my permanent absence. You called me a boring ATM machine. So I am simply giving you exactly what you asked for tonight. The ATM is permanently out of service. Beatrice scoffed, a harsh grating sound that betrayed her rising internal panic. You are bluffing, Maya. You would never cut off your mother. You lack the spine for it. You have always been desperate for my approval, and you will wire that money by morning because you are weak. I smiled, watching the live feed return to my computer screen. I do not need to bluff, mother, I said smoothly. Why do you not check your banking app right now? In fact, tell Chloe to check hers too. On my laptop screen, I watched Beatrice pull her phone from her purse with a dismissive roll of her eyes, muttering under her breath about my blatant disrespect. At the exact same moment, Chloe's phone, resting on the glass coffee table, lit up with a rapid succession of urgent push notifications. I watched the security feed as Chloe casually picked up her mobile device. Her perpetually bored expression instantly vanished. She let out a piercing guttural scream that echoed loudly through my own laptop speakers. She dropped her wine glass, the remaining red liquid splashing onto her bare legs as she stared in absolute horror at the cascading alerts of overdrafts, canceled accounts, and insufficient funds lighting up her screen in real time. The living room descended into absolute madness as notifications continued to flood her mobile screen. She lunged forward, slipping on spilled wine, and grabbed Marcus by the collar of his expensive cashmere sweater. Her perfectly manicured fingernails dug into the fabric as she shook him violently, demanding to know what he had done to her accounts. She shrieked that her bank was blocking her access, accusing him of orchestrating this financial disaster to punish their mother. Marcus tried to pry her hands off his chest, but his panic made his movements weak and uncoordinated. He stumbled backward, crashing into the decorated Christmas tree, sending glass ornaments shattering across the hardwood floor. Beatrice ignored the destruction entirely. She was frantically tapping her own phone screen, her face contorting in a mixture of disbelief and mounting rage. The platinum card she had just used to order a fleet of luxury cars for their upcoming ski trip was now frozen. She slapped Marcus hard across the face, blaming his blatant infidelity for ruining their perfect holiday arrangement. Bradley paced near the fireplace, pulling at his hair, realizing his car lease was in default. He kicked the fallen tree stand in absolute furious frustration. Sarah, the blonde mistress, watched the violent spectacle from the edge of the sofa. She had remained quiet since the news broadcast, but her eyes were calculating the shifting dynamics. She looked at Marcus, currently pinned against the wall by my furious sister. She looked around, taking in the imported crystal and heated marble floors. The puzzle pieces finally clicked together in her opportunistic mind. She walked toward Marcus, navigating carefully around the broken ornaments and red wine. Her voice cut through the shouting like a sharp blade. "You do not actually own any of this, do you?" she asked, her tone devoid of affection. "You told me this was your estate. You told me Vanguard Financial paid you enough to buy this mansion in cash." Marcus sputtered, attempting to smooth his ruined sweater and salvage his shattered dignity. He begged her to let him explain, promising he could fix the situation. Sarah did not wait for his pathetic excuses. She snatched her long coat off the chair. She looked at him with unadulterated disgust, realizing her ticket to a wealthy lifestyle was a complete fraud. She turned and marched straight out the front door, abandoning him to the wolves. I sat alone in my luxurious penthouse suite, mesmerized by the spectacular implosion happening on my laptop screen. My heart beat with a steady rhythmic calm that contrasted sharply with the utter devastation I had just unleashed upon my betrayers. The hollow emptiness I felt when I first checked into the hotel was entirely gone, replaced by a cold, calculating satisfaction. I watched my mother drop to her knees, weeping loudly as she frantically attempted to transfer funds from accounts that no longer existed. I watched my sister throw a silver candlestick at her husband, blaming him for her financial ruin. They were tearing each other apart, driven by the sudden evaporation of the wealth they felt entitled to. They had built their entire identities on the foundation of my silent labor, and now that the foundation was removed, their true natures were fully exposed. I did not shed a single tear for any of them. Instead, I picked up my mobile phone and opened my encrypted messaging application. It was time to secure the perimeter and finalize the cleanup operation. I navigated to the contact listed as Alpha Team, the elite private security firm I retained for personal protection. I typed out my orders with rapid precision. "I need a full tactical extraction team at the Chicago estate tomorrow morning at exactly 8 a.m. I want all current occupants removed from the premises immediately. Do not allow them to take anything other than the clothes currently on their backs. Any resistance is to be met with absolute zero tolerance. Send the confirmation code once the perimeter is fully secured." I hit send and watched the message turn green, indicating it was received and acknowledged by the security commander. Next, I opened a new message window and selected the contact group for my lead corporate auditors at Apex Holdings. They had been on standby all evening, waiting for my final directive regarding Vanguard Financial. I instructed them to freeze every single corporate account associated with Marcus, effective immediately. I ordered a comprehensive forensic audit of his entire department going back 5 years. I wanted every fraudulent expense report, every unauthorized travel voucher, and every misused corporate dollar cataloged and prepared for legal prosecution. He had used my own company to fund his infidelity, and I was going to ensure he spent the next decade paying back every single stolen dime. The final step of my meticulous plan required one last personal touch. I minimized the security feed on my laptop, watching the muted chaos continue. My mother was still sobbing on the ruined rug while Marcus sat slumped against the wall, looking completely broken and utterly defeated. The grand foyer looked like a battleground strewn with shattered glass, spilled liquor, and the remnants of their shattered egos. They had underestimated me for years, treating me like a disposable asset while gorging themselves on the fruits of my relentless labor. They truly believed I was weak, simply because I chose peace over conflict and silence over bragging. They were about to learn that my silence was never submission, it was always strategy. I opened the group chat on my phone labeled Family. The last message sent was a picture from Chloe showing off her dress, complaining that I had forgotten to buy the expensive champagne she requested. I stared at the screen for a long moment, feeling a profound sense of closure wash over my body. I typed out my final message to them. Enjoy the turkey. I will be coming home at exactly 8 a.m. to take out the trash. The morning sun glared off the fresh Chicago snow as my black SUV pulled up to the wrought iron gates of my estate. The clock on the dashboard read exactly 8 in the morning. I stepped out into the freezing air feeling completely invigorated. Flanking me were two imposing security contractors from Alpha Team dressed in pristine tactical suits. Right behind them walked Elias, my lead corporate attorney, gripping a thick leather briefcase. We marched up the salted driveway in a tight wedge formation. The front door was unlocked exactly as I had left it. I pushed the heavy oak open without knocking, letting the icy winter draft sweep into the grand foyer. The remnants of last night's disaster were still scattered across the imported marble floor. Smeared red wine stained the expensive rugs, and shattered glass sparkled dangerously under the crystal chandelier. The house smelled faintly of stale bourbon and desperate panic. It was a scent that spoke volumes about their long, miserable night. I walked into the living room and found my family essentially barricaded in the sunken seating area. They looked absolutely wretched. Nobody had slept a single wink. The bags under their eyes were deep and shadowed, resembling bruised purple storm clouds. Beatrice sat huddled on the ruined custom sofa, wrapped in a cashmere blanket with her makeup completely smeared down her pale cheeks. Chloe was aggressively biting her fingernails, staring at her dead phone screen with hollow, bloodshot eyes. Bradley paced back and forth near the dead fireplace, running his hands through his unkempt hair while muttering frantic calculations to himself. They all froze the second I stepped onto the plush carpet. The air in the room grew heavy and thick with raw terror. My security guards instantly fanned out, taking dominant positions by the primary exits. Elias stood silently at my right side, radiating cold legal authority. I slowly unbuttoned my wool coat and let it fall over the back of a leather armchair. "Good morning, everyone," I said, my voice cheerful and crisp. "I hope you all enjoyed the holiday turkey because it will be the last free meal you ever eat in my house." Marcus was huddled in the far corner of the room, looking like a beaten dog. His designer navy slacks were wrinkled, and his gray sweater was stained with sweat. The moment he heard my voice, he practically scrambled across the room, falling to his knees just a few feet away from my boots. "Maya, please," he begged, his hands clasped together in a pathetic display of submission. "You have to listen to me. I was totally out of my mind last night. The pressure of the Vanguard promotion made me do crazy things. I never wanted to hurt you. I love you, Maya. You are my wife." I looked down at him, feeling absolutely nothing but clinical disgust. He reached out to touch the hem of my coat, but one of my security guards took a sharp step forward, causing him to flinch and pull his hand back. He cowered on the floor, utterly terrified of the consequences he finally had to face. "I am so sorry," he cried out, tears actually spilling down his face. "It was not my fault, Maya. Sarah manipulated me. She threw herself at me at the office and threatened to ruin my career if I did not play along. She means absolutely nothing to me. I swear on my life." At the mention of her name, the blonde mistress shot up from her chair near the kitchen entrance. Sarah looked completely horrified by his sudden cowardly betrayal. She had spent the entire night trapped in a house with a financially ruined family, and now her meal ticket was openly throwing her to the wolves to save his own skin. "You spineless coward," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Marcus. "You told me your wife was a frigid loser who did not understand your genius. You told me you were going to divorce her and give me this house. You swore to me that she was just a temporary stepping stone for our glorious future together." Sarah quickly grabbed her designer coat and backed away toward the sliding glass doors leading to the rear patio. "I am not a part of this toxic family," she declared, her voice rising in panic. "I am leaving right now and you will never see me again, Marcus." She turned on her heel and lunged for the exit, desperate to escape the consequences of her greedy choices. Before her hand could even touch the brass handle, my second security guard stepped seamlessly into her path. He was 6 feet 4 inches of solid muscle blocking the sunlight from the patio. He crossed his arms over his chest and stared down at her with a blank, intimidating expression. Sarah let out a short, startled gasp and stumbled backward, bumping into the kitchen island. She looked wildly around the room, realizing she was completely trapped. Her breathing hitched, and tears of genuine fright welled up in her perfectly mascaraed eyes as she slid down the counter. I walked slowly toward the center of the living room, the heels of my boots clicking rhythmically against the hardwood floor. "Nobody leaves," I announced, my voice echoing through the silent house with absolute finality. I signaled to Elias with a brief nod. He stepped forward, unlatched his leather briefcase, and pulled out a massive stack of bound documents. He handed them to me. These were the audited financial records, the forensic accounting reports, and the documented proof of every stolen dime and manipulated contract. I lifted the heavy stack of papers and dropped them directly onto the center of the glass coffee table. The resulting slam made my mother jump in her seat. I looked at the miserable, terrified faces surrounding me. "We have some accounts to settle, and none of you are walking out until every debt is fully paid." Sarah pushed herself off the kitchen island, dusting off her coat with a sudden burst of frantic bravado. She lifted her chin, attempting to project an air of untouchable arrogance despite the 2 massive security guards blocking her escape. "You cannot keep me here," she declared, her voice trembling only slightly. "This is kidnapping or false imprisonment or whatever the legal term is. I am calling the police right now." She fumbled in her designer purse, retrieving her phone with shaking fingers. "Besides, I am a victim in this too. Marcus lied to me. I had absolutely no idea he was married. He told me his wife was a terrible person who controlled his life, but he never said he was actually married. You cannot hold me responsible for the actions of a lying, cheating man." I stepped forward, sliding one of the thick manila folders from the stack on the table. I flipped it open leisurely, pulling out a neatly printed document. "You are a junior financial analyst, Sarah," I stated, letting the fact hang in the cold air. "You work at Vanguard Financial in the acquisitions department. You have been there for exactly 14 months. You graduated with a degree in accounting, which means you are entirely capable of reading basic tax documents and public records. The idea that you could not verify the marital status of the senior vice president of your own division is not just an insult to my intelligence, it is an insult to your own education." I pulled out a glossy photograph from the file and tossed it onto the glass surface. It was a picture of Sarah and Marcus at a corporate gala, laughing intimately. You knew exactly who he was, and you knew exactly who I was. You simply thought I was too boring and oblivious to ever catch on to your pathetic little scheme. Sarah stared at the photograph, her tough facade cracking slightly at the edges. "That proves nothing," she countered, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. "We went to a work event. That is not a crime. I just wanted a successful career, and he promised to mentor me. I am not a homewrecker, Maya. I just trusted the wrong mentor. It is not illegal to be lied to by your boss. I will sue you for everything you own if you do not let me walk out of that door right this second." I smiled, pulling out a secondary stack of papers. These were completely covered in highlighted red ink and aggressive audit stamps. "It is not illegal to date your boss," I agreed smoothly. It is, however, highly illegal to use corporate funds to finance your romantic hotel getaways. I spread the audited expense reports across the table. Each one detailed lavish expenditures at luxury hotels, high-end restaurants, and exclusive spa retreats. As a junior analyst, you personally approved and routed Marcus's expense reports through the secondary tier accounting system, bypassing the standard review process. You knowingly categorized weekend trips to Aspen as client development seminars. You disguised diamond jewelry purchases as corporate gifting allowances. You did not just sleep with my husband, Sarah. You actively facilitated a coordinated embezzlement scheme against your employer. You acted as his willing accomplice in systematically defrauding the company to sustain a lifestyle neither of you could actually afford. The blood drained completely from her face. Her confident posture collapsed as she stared at the highlighted documents containing her own digital signature authorizing the fraudulent transactions. Vanguard Financial was just acquired yesterday by Apex Holdings. I continued pacing slowly around the seating area. As the majority shareholder of Apex, I now own Vanguard. I own the company you work for, the company you stole from. You are not a victim of a bad romance. You are a partner in a documented case of corporate financial fraud. Beatrice and Chloe were silent, completely forgotten in the background as they watched this execution play out. Marcus was still on his knees, covering his face with his hands, refusing to look at the woman he had ruined his life over. Sarah looked frantically between the documents, the security guards, and Elias, who was standing rigidly holding a separate sealed envelope. She was hyperventilating, her tough act entirely shattered by the crushing weight of undeniable proof and imminent disaster. Elias stepped forward at my silent command. He handed Sarah the thick white envelope. Her hands shook violently as she took it, tearing the seal open. Inside were two very distinct legal documents. I watched her eyes dart back and forth across the heavy legal jargon. The first document is your official termination letter. I explained, my voice devoid of any sympathy. You are fired for cause effective immediately. You will receive no severance, no benefits, and no positive references. The second document is formal notice of a civil lawsuit filed against you and Marcus jointly by Apex Holdings. We are suing you for the full recovery of the stolen funds, plus punitive damages for the intentional manipulation of corporate accounting systems. You will never work in the financial sector again. Your career is permanently over. Sarah dropped the papers onto the floor as if they physically burned her fingers. She looked at Marcus, who was trying to crawl backward away from the inevitable explosion. Her panic instantly transformed into pure survival instinct. She marched right up to him and kicked his leg hard. "Tell her it was your idea," she screamed, her voice shrill and desperate. "Tell her you forced me to sign those approvals. You are the senior vice president. You threatened to fire me if I did not help you hide the expenses. Maya, I will testify against him. I will tell the auditors everything they want to know. I have emails and text messages proving he orchestrated the entire scheme. Just please drop the lawsuit against me. I will give you everything you need to destroy him completely." The frantic, echoing promise from Sarah to destroy her lover hung in the freezing air. Marcus squeezed his eyes shut and let out a pathetic whimper, fully realizing he had lost both his wife and his mistress. This pathetic surrender finally snapped Bradley out of his stunned silence. The husband of Chloe had always considered himself the intellectual superior in any room. He possessed a specific brand of unearned confidence that allowed him to fail upward his entire life, funded by the very ATM he had mocked. He straightened his back, smoothed his blazer, and stepped over the shattered glass scattered across the rug. He positioned himself between me and Marcus, puffing out his chest, as if his physical presence could command authority. He shot a dismissive look at my security contractors before turning his gaze to me. "You have completely lost your mind, Maya," Bradley declared, crossing his arms and using a tone dripping with condescension. "You think you can march in here with hired muscle and throw us out into the winter. That is not how the real world works. This is a marital residence. Marcus is on the marriage certificate, which makes this his legal home. You cannot legally evict a spouse or their invited family members without proper judicial process. I have read up on local property statutes. We have established residency here. We possess tenant rights at the absolute bare minimum. By law, you are required to serve us with a formal 90-day eviction notice file it through the county courts and wait for a judge to grant a hearing. If these hired security guards lay a single finger on any of us, I will personally file assault charges and sue this firm into absolute bankruptcy. He smirked, believing his legal threats had checkmated my operation. He stood tall, waiting for the familiar submissive Maya to apologize and retreat. Beatrice stopped sobbing, looking up at Bradley with a sudden gleam of renewed hope shining in her eyes. Chloe put her phone down, nodding along with her husband. They were all clinging to the desperate fantasy that the rudimentary internet-searched legal jargon would shield them from the consequences of their actions. I did not interrupt him. I let him finish his pompous speech, savoring the absolute certainty in his voice. I let the silence stretch out for several long seconds, allowing his false confidence to fully marinate in the cold room. Then I turned my head slightly and gave Elias a brief, subtle nod. My lead corporate attorney did not smile. Elias possessed a lethal clinical efficiency that made him a nightmare for opposing counsel. He stepped forward smoothly, bypassing the debris, and stopped just inches away from Bradley. Elias unclasped his leather briefcase and withdrew a single crisp document, encased in a blue legal folder. He held it out. Bradley hesitated for a fraction of a second before snatching the folder, his arrogant smirk beginning to falter slightly at the edges. "I highly suggest you read the title deed filed on the second page," Elias instructed, his voice slicing through the tension. "You will notice that the property you are currently standing in is not owned by Maya. It is certainly not owned by Marcus. This estate, including all associated fixtures, is entirely owned by Apex Holdings Management, a corporate limited liability company in which my client holds a 100% controlling interest. You are not standing in a marital home, Bradley. You are standing on corporate property. Marcus has never paid a mortgage, a utility bill, or a property tax installment. Under state law, he is not classified as a tenant, a partial owner, or a resident. He is legally classified as a non-paying guest whose license to occupy the premises has just been formally revoked." Bradley stared at this printed deed, his eyes scanning the bold legal text. His jaw visibly slackened as the reality of the corporate structure sank into his mind. Elias adjusted his glasses and continued his ruthless legal dismantling. Tenant rights do not apply to transient guests on corporate property who have been explicitly instructed to vacate by the controlling owner. The 90-day eviction notice you referenced is entirely irrelevant. As of precisely 8 a.m. this morning, every single person in this room is legally classified as a trespasser. My corporate security team does not need a court order to remove you. If you refuse to leave voluntarily, they have full legal authorization to physically escort you to the property line. If you resist, the local police will be called to arrest you for criminal trespassing. The air rushed out of his lungs. His broad shoulders slumped, and the arrogant, commanding posture he had assumed vanished completely. He looked back at Chloe, who was staring at him with wide, terrified eyes, waiting for him to produce another legal loophole to save them. There were none. The property laws he had so smugly quoted were useless against a properly structured corporate asset protection plan. I had intentionally placed this estate in an LLC 5 years ago specifically to shield it from his financial incompetence. I just never expected it to serve as the perfect weapon for his absolute eviction. I stepped closer to Bradley, invading his personal space. His eyes darted nervously to the 2 massive security guards flanking me, realizing his threat to sue them held zero weight. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a separate, remarkably thick folder. His hands were actually shaking as I held the file out toward him. His entire facade of white privilege, unearned arrogance, and supreme entitlement had been thoroughly crushed in less than 5 minutes. He stared at the new folder as if it were a live explosive device. "Do not worry about real estate law right now, Bradley," I said, maintaining direct and unblinking eye contact as I shoved the extremely heavy folder directly against his chest. "I would worry about the IRS." Bradley fumbled with the folder, his hands trembling violently. He flipped open the cover. His eyes darted across the bank statements and tax forms. color drained from his pale face. The arrogant posture he maintained completely disintegrated. You see, Bradley, I found it fascinating that an app developer with zero products could lease a luxury Porsche, I said, walking around the sofa to stand directly in front of him. You spent years bragging about your incredible startup. You called yourself an entrepreneur. My accountants painted a different picture. I turned my gaze to my mother, who was shivering. For the past 5 years, I have been anonymously funneling a massive monthly stipend into an account designated for your household living expenses, I explained to her. It was supposed to cover the property taxes, the maintenance, and ensure you never had to worry about financial stability. It was my duty as the successful daughter to pay the silent tax expected of me. But you never actually saw the bulk of that money, did you, Beatrice? My mother looked up, her brow furrowed in genuine confusion. She shook her head slowly. Bradley stepped in 3 years ago, offering to manage your finances to help optimize your retirement savings. I continued, my voice rising. He convinced you to sign over access to your primary accounts, claiming he was going to invest your money in high-yield tech funds. He created a shell company called Zenith Innovations and registered it in Delaware. Chloe stood up, her hands shaking as she looked at her husband. Bradley, what is she talking about? She demanded, her voice cracking. You told me your seed investors were funding our lifestyle. You told me the app was in beta testing. Bradley could not even look at his wife. He kept his eyes glued to the floor, entirely paralyzed by the undeniable paper trail exposing his lies. There are no seed investors, Chloe, I stated flatly, shattering her delusion. There is no application in beta testing. Zenith Innovations has 0 employees, 0 intellectual property, and 0 revenue. It is nothing more than a dummy corporation Bradley designed to siphon the money I was sending to our mother. He took my hard-earned cash and funneled it directly into his personal accounts. And what exactly did our brilliant entrepreneur do with hundreds of thousands of stolen dollars, I asked, gesturing dramatically to the folder in his hands. He certainly did not invest it. He blew it all on disastrous cryptocurrency trades and illegal offshore gambling syndicates. We have the complete transaction history, Bradley. We tracked every single Bitcoin transfer and every single deposit made to those digital casinos. You gambled away your own mother-in-law financial security while sitting at my dining table drinking my wine and calling me a boring corporate drone. You built your entire identity on the illusion of success, financed entirely by the woman you spent your time mocking. Bradley finally found his voice, though it was a pathetic, high-pitched whine. You cannot prove any of this, he stammered, taking a step backward. Those transactions could belong to anyone. It is circumstantial evidence, Maya. You are just trying to ruin my reputation because you are jealous of our happiness. Elias let out a sharp, humorless chuckle. It is not circumstantial, Bradley, my lawyer corrected smoothly. We have subpoenaed the IP addresses associated with every single transfer. They all trace directly back to your personal laptop and your mobile device. We also have the tax returns you filed under Zenith Innovations, claiming massive corporate losses to offset the gambling revenues you actually managed to generate. You committed federal wire fraud and tax evasion. The IRS Criminal Investigation Division received this exact folder at exactly 6 a.m. this morning. Beatrice let out a low, guttural gasp. She dropped her cashmere blanket and slowly stood up. Her eyes were fixed on Bradley, her expression transforming from confusion to absolute horror. You stole from me, she whispered, her voice shaking with rage. You took the money Maya was sending me. Bradley held up his hands, backing away from the matriarch. Beatrice, please listen to me, he pleaded. I was trying to grow the money. I had a foolproof system for the crypto markets. I just hit a bad run of luck. I was going to pay it all back as soon as the market rebounded. I swear I was trying to secure our family legacy. That is not even the worst part, Mother, I interjected, delivering the final lethal strike. I reached into the folder Bradley was holding and pulled out a single sheet of paper, holding it up for everyone to see. In order to cover his massive gambling losses last year, Bradley needed a massive influx of cash. But his credit was completely destroyed. So he applied for a high-risk commercial loan using Zenith Innovations as the guarantor. but the bank required a co-signer with pristine credit and substantial assets. I handed the paper directly to Beatrice. He used your social security number and forged your signature to secure a $300,000 loan, Mother. He stole your identity. You are now personally liable for a massive fraudulent debt that is currently in severe default. The silence in the room was deafening. Chloe covered her mouth with both hands, a muffled sob escaping her lips as she stared at the man she had married. She finally realized her entire life of luxury was built on a foundation of pathetic lies and criminal theft. Bradley opened his mouth to formulate another excuse, but the words never came out. Beatrice stepped forward with a speed and ferocity I had never seen her display. She raised her right hand and slapped Bradley across the face with devastating force. The sharp crack echoed loudly off the high ceiling. Bradley stumbled backward, clutching his reddened cheek, his eyes wide with shock. He looked at his mother-in-law, completely terrified. Chloe let out a piercing shriek that shattered the ringing silence following the slap. She threw herself between her mother and husband, acting as a shield. She shoved Beatrice back with shocking force, her face contorted into pure rage. "Do not you dare touch him!" Chloe screamed, her voice echoing across the ceiling. She spun around to face me, her manicured hands curled into tight fists, her perfectly styled hair unspooled in jagged strands around her flushed face. "This is all your fault, Maya. You planned this entire ambush just to humiliate us because you cannot stand the fact that I am happy. You have always been a bitter, jealous troll. You are obsessed with tearing down my perfect marriage because your own life is nothing but a miserable, lonely corporate grind." She paced erratically in front of Bradley like a cornered animal defending its mate. "You spent our entire lives resenting me," Chloe continued, her volume rising with every delusional word. "You hated that Mom loved me more. You hated that I married a brilliant entrepreneur while you were stuck working 80-hour weeks just to afford an empty apartment. You brought these fake documents and rented guards here to stage a pathetic revenge fantasy. Bradley is a visionary. His startup will change the industry, and you are terrified that we are about to become infinitely more successful than you will ever be. You are an envious woman trying to destroy my perfect life because you have nothing else to live for." I watched her frantic performance with glacial detachment. I let her exhaust her lungs, waiting until she gasped for air before I finally responded. "Jealous of what exactly, Chloe?" I asked, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous timbre. "Am I supposed to be jealous of a woman who stole my Stanford tuition money just to finance a 2-month party in Ibiza?" Chloe stiffened, the color draining from her blotchy cheeks. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, closing the distance between us. "Did you honestly think I forgot about that?" I continued, pinning her in place. "When I was 18, I saved every penny from my high school jobs to pay for my freshman year, and you cried to our mother that you needed to find yourself in Europe. Beatrice handed you the check containing my entire savings account, calling it a necessary investment in your social development. I spent the next 4 years working night shifts at a dirty diner, tutoring failing freshmen, and shelving books in the library until 2 in the morning just to pay my own way. You did not build a perfect life, Chloe. You built a parasitic existence funded by my sweat and our mother enabling." Chloe swallowed hard, her eyes darting nervously toward Beatrice, who was still breathing heavily. "That was a family loan," Chloe stammered, her confident outrage replaced by a weak, defensive stutter. "Mom said we shared our resources. You are bringing up ancient history because you have no real argument. You are trying to deflect from the fact that you are framing my husband." I did not argue. I simply extended my hand backward. Elias slapped a new stack of financial records into my palm. I tossed them onto the glass coffee table where they fanned out in a damning display of highlighted bank transfers. "I am not framing anyone, Chloe," I stated coldly. "The most pathetic part of your hysterical speech is that you are playing the victim when you have been a willing accomplice this entire time." I pointed to the bank statements. "Those are the transfer logs from Zenith Innovations. Bradley did not just lose my money at the digital blackjack tables. He transferred 30% of those stolen funds directly into your personal checking account." Chloe opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. She stared at the papers as if they were poisonous. We tracked your spending over the last 36 months. I continued walking her through her crimes. That limited edition Birkin bag you flaunted at Thanksgiving was purchased using the exact amount Bradley siphoned from Beatrice's retirement account 2 days prior. Those diamond Cartier bracelets you claim Bradley bought for your anniversary were funded by the fraudulent loan he took out using our mother's social security number. You spent $50,000 on luxury spa retreats in Aspen and shopping sprees in Paris, all financed by the money I sent to keep a roof over our mother head. You knew exactly where the cash was coming from, Chloe. You knew Bradley had no income. You watched him forge those documents and spent the proceeds while looking our mother right in the eye, telling her you were worried about her financial future. The truth hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Chloe looked down at the transaction logs bearing her own name and her signature on the luxury receipts. Her breathing became shallow. The grand illusion she had constructed around herself was evaporating into thin air. She slowly turned her head, looking at the corporate estate she was about to be thrown out of. She looked at her husband, who was currently facing multiple federal wire fraud charges and decades in prison. She realized in one crushing moment of clarity that she was entirely broke, homeless, and legally implicated in a massive financial crime. Desperate for any remaining lifeline, Chloe turned toward the one person who had always shielded her from consequences. She reached out her trembling hands toward Beatrice, tears of genuine panic spilling down her face. "Mom, please," Chloe begged, her voice breaking into a pathetic whimper. "You have to believe me. I did not know how bad it was. You have to help us." Beatrice did not move to comfort her favorite daughter. The matriarch simply stared back at Chloe. The maternal warmth that had protected the golden child for 3 decades was completely gone, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. The sharp sound of the slap still echoed in the cavernous room as the family dynamics completely unraveled. Bradley cowered against the wall, clutching his face, while Beatrice glared at him with undisguised venom. Chloe sank to her knees on the expensive rug, weeping into her hands, as her fabricated world of luxury collapsed around her. Taking advantage of the chaotic distraction, my husband slowly rose from his pathetic crouch. Marcus wiped the cold sweat from his forehead and took a cautious step toward me. His eyes darted nervously toward Elias and the security contractors before settling on my face. He recognized that the corporate slaughter happening to his brother-in-law was merely a prelude to his own execution. He leaned in close, attempting to project the calm, measured tone he usually reserved for hostile boardroom negotiations. He kept his voice to a desperate whisper, hoping to isolate our conversation from the surrounding carnage. "Maya, we need to stop this before it goes any further," he pleaded, holding his hands up in a gesture of surrender. "You have made your point loud and clear." Marcus continued, his voice shaking despite his best efforts to sound rational. "You completely blindsided me and you tore Bradley apart. You win. But we do not need to turn this into a public spectacle that destroys both of our lives. I will give you whatever you want. We can process a clean, quiet divorce. I will walk away from this estate without claiming a single dime of equity. I will sign the preliminary settlement papers tonight and leave you with everything. You can keep the cars, the investment portfolios, and the offshore assets. Just please let me keep my career intact. Do not take this to the Vanguard Board of Directors. If you expose my indiscretions with Sarah to the executive committee, I will be blacklisted from the entire financial sector. I am begging you to show just a fraction of mercy for the 10 years we spent together. I will vanish from your life completely if you just let me walk out of that front door with my professional reputation." I stared at the man I had shared a bed with for a decade, feeling nothing but absolute revulsion. He was still trying to negotiate a golden parachute, while his entire professional life was already up in flames. I took a deliberate step back, creating a physical boundary between us. "You really are struggling to comprehend the magnitude of your situation, Marcus," I replied, my voice echoing clearly over Chloe's quiet sobbing. "You are bargaining with chips you no longer possess. You cannot offer to walk away from this estate because you have already been legally evicted. You cannot offer me the investment portfolios because my forensic accountants have already frozen them, and you certainly cannot ask me to hide your indiscretions from the Vanguard Board of Directors. I tilted my head, studying his desperate expression. As of yesterday afternoon, the old executive board has been entirely dissolved following the Apex Holdings acquisition. I am not just the majority shareholder of the parent company anymore. I am the newly appointed Chief Executive Officer of Vanguard Financial. The remaining color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost standing in the middle of the living room. His jaw worked silently as his brain short-circuited, trying to process the fact that his wife was now his ultimate superior. My first official act as CEO was ordering a hostile takeover audit of the entire acquisitions department. I continued pacing slowly around him. I knew you were funneling corporate money to pay for your luxury hotel suites and diamond necklaces for Sarah. I showed her those expense reports earlier. But my forensic accounting team dug much deeper into your vendor authorization logs. We found the ghost accounts, Marcus. We traced the irregular payments you authorized to phantom consulting firms operating out of the Cayman Islands. You did not just cheat on me with a junior analyst. You orchestrated a highly sophisticated embezzlement ring from within your own department. Over the past 4 years, you systematically siphoned exactly $2.5 million of Vanguard corporate funds into a secret offshore trust account. Marcus staggered backward, colliding heavily with the edge of the glass coffee table. He gripped the furniture, trying to keep himself from collapsing to the floor. "Maya, that is insane," he stammered, his voice pitching into a panicked squeak. "You cannot possibly believe I would steal corporate funds. Those consulting payments were strictly for international market research. The board approved those vendor contracts years ago. You are looking at legitimate business expenses and twisting them to frame me because you are angry about Sarah. I can provide the deliverables. I can prove those were legitimate offshore contractors. You cannot just invent a multi-million-dollar embezzlement scandal to punish me for a marital affair." He was hyperventilating, his eyes darting frantically around the room, looking for an exit that was blocked by my security team. He was drowning in his own lies, desperately trying to tread water, while strapped to an anchor of undeniable financial evidence. I gestured for Elias, who stepped forward and immediately handed me the final, very thick binder of the long evening. I dropped the heavy forensic audit report onto the table right in front of him. "You begged me not to ruin your career, Marcus." I smiled, a cold, humorless expression that promised absolute destruction. "But your career was over the exact moment I found those hidden bank transfers. As the new CEO, I did not just fire you. I bypassed the corporate compliance department entirely. I handed the unredacted forensic audit directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation." Marcus dropped hard to his knees, his hands tightly clutching his chest. Piercing the quiet winter night, the unmistakable wail of approaching police sirens echoed through the estate windows, growing louder and louder with every passing second. Flashing red and blue lights sliced through the darkness, casting frantic colored shadows across the vaulted ceiling of the living room. The sirens abruptly died as multiple vehicles skidded to a halt on the gravel driveway just outside the main doors. Heavy footsteps crunched against the frost-covered ground, followed by the slam of car doors. Total panic instantly consumed the remaining occupants of the room. Chloe scrambled backward from the windows, her earlier rage entirely replaced by pure animalistic terror. She grabbed Bradley by his lapels, demanding to know if the authorities were here for him. Bradley was hyperventilating, his eyes darting toward the exits, completely paralyzed by the realization that his fraudulent schemes had caught up with him. But this deployment of federal agents was not meant for the pathetic app developer. This raid was orchestrated entirely for the vice president kneeling on the floor. Marcus remained rooted to the spot, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the edge of the glass table. The reality of the approaching footsteps shattered whatever fragile delusions he had left. He scrambled forward on his hands and knees, ignoring the shards of broken glass that bit into his expensive trousers. He lunged toward my legs, his fingers desperately grabbing at the hem of my coat. Maya, please, Marcus sobbed, his voice cracking into a high, unrecognizable pitch. You cannot let them do this. You have to tell them it is a corporate misunderstanding. Tell them we are handling it internally. I stared down at the man who had spent the last 4 years draining my company and sharing his bed with a junior analyst. He looked utterly pathetic, a hollow shell of the arrogant executive who had constantly belittled my ambition. We took vows, Maya, he pleaded, his face streaked with sweat and tears. For better or for worse, I am your husband. You loved me once. You cannot just throw me in a federal penitentiary. I will give the money back, every single cent of it. I will sell everything I own. Just call them off. Please, I am begging you, call off the dogs. I did not flinch. I did not step away. I simply looked down at him with eyes devoid of any lingering affection or mercy. I reached down and methodically pried his trembling fingers off my coat, dropping his hands back to his sides. You made your choice the moment you wired that first payment to the Cayman Islands, I stated, my voice echoing with absolute finality. You made your choice the moment you decided my corporate assets were your personal slush fund. Do you remember what you told me last night when you thought I was losing everything? When you thought I was weak and defeated? Marcus stared up at me, his chest heaving, completely unable to form a coherent response. I leaned down, bringing my face close to his, ensuring every syllable struck with maximum impact. You looked me straight in the eyes and told me to pack my bags. You told me that failures do not belong here. Well, Marcus, you failed to hide your embezzlement, you failed to protect your mistress, and you failed to realize who you were truly dealing with, and you certainly do not belong here. The heavy oak front doors swung open with a violent crash. 4 federal agents, flanked by 2 local police officers, stormed into the grand foyer. Their tactical boots pounded against the marble floor as they fanned out, securing the perimeter of the room. The lead agent, a tall man with a stern face, held up a federal arrest warrant. His eyes scanned the room before locking onto the man kneeling at my feet. Marcus Vance, the lead agent barked, his voice leaving no room for negotiation. You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. Stand up and place your hands behind your back. Marcus let out a wounded sound. He did not move. He stayed frozen on the rug, shaking his head in silent denial. 2 agents immediately stepped forward, grabbing him by his shoulders and hauling him roughly to his feet. They spun him around, slamming him face first against the nearest wall. The sharp metallic click of handcuffs snapping shut around his wrists echoed through the cavernous space. Marcus squeezed his eyes shut, openly weeping, as the agents began reciting his Miranda rights in a flat, clinical monotone. They did not grant him a single moment to compose himself. They pulled him backward, marching him forcefully toward the open doors. He twisted his neck, trying to look back at me one last time, his expression pleading for a mercy he would never receive. I watched in silence as the darkness of the winter night swallowed him whole, taking my cheating, stealing husband out of my life forever. The heavy doors clicked shut, plunging the living room back into a bizarre, suffocating silence. Elias stood perfectly still, his hands folded neatly in front of him, surveying the wreckage of my family with professional satisfaction. Bradley and Chloe were huddled together in the corner, holding their breath, terrified that the agents might return for them. The entire toxic hierarchy that had governed my existence for 3 decades had been systematically dismantled and destroyed in a single evening. Then the most repulsive sound imaginable broke the quiet. It was the sound of my mother attempting to laugh. Beatrice smoothed down her rumpled skirt and stepped over the debris, her face transforming into an expression of radiant maternal pride. She walked directly toward me, throwing her arms wide open in a dramatic gesture of affection. "Oh, my brilliant, beautiful girl," Beatrice cooed, her voice dripping with artificial warmth as she reached out to hug me. "I always knew you were the smart one. You handled that brilliantly, Maya. You got rid of a truly toxic man and protected your assets. I am so incredibly proud of you." I stepped back so quickly that Beatrice stumbled forward, her arms grasping at empty air. The sheer whiplash of her shifting allegiances was enough to cause vertigo. Less than 10 minutes ago, she had been glaring at me as if I were a monster for exposing her precious son-in-law. Now that the federal agents had hauled my cheating husband out the front door, she was instantly attempting to rewrite history. She adjusted her cashmere cardigan and plastered on a sickeningly sweet smile, completely ignoring Chloe, who was still weeping into the expensive Persian rug. Beatrice looked around the lavish living room with calculating eyes, already assessing how she could secure her place in my newly consolidated empire. "We do not need them, Maya," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper designed to simulate intimacy. "Those bad men were just dragging us down. They were parasites feeding off our family. But now it is just us." Beatrice took another tentative step toward me, her hands clasped together in a posture of intense maternal devotion. "You have this massive, beautiful estate all to yourself now," she continued, weaving her desperate fantasy with practiced ease. "It is far too big for one person to manage alone. Chloe and I can stay here with you. We can support each other through this terrible trauma. We will be a real family again, just the three of us women standing strong against the world. You can focus on running Vanguard Financial, and we will take care of the home. We can decorate the East Wing for Chloe to help her recover from Bradley's horrible deception." Chloe sniffled, wiping her mascara-stained cheeks, looking up with a sudden glimmer of hope in her eyes. Even after watching her husband face decades in prison, the golden child was still eager to latch onto a new host, provided it came with a luxury zip code. The absolute audacity of her proposal settled over me like a layer of frost. I stared at the woman who had spent my entire life making me feel like a secondary citizen in my own home. A real family. I repeated the words, tasting like ash in my mouth. "Is that what we were doing last Christmas when Marcus stood in this exact room and called my promotion a diversity quota hire?" I looked directly into Beatrice's eyes, refusing to let her look away from the ugly truth. "You sat right there on that velvet sofa sipping the vintage champagne I bought and laughed at his cruel joke. You told him he needed to be patient with me because I lacked Chloe's natural charm. When I paid off your mortgage 5 years ago, you complained that the bank transfer took too long and made you miss a country club luncheon. You have never been a mother to me, Beatrice. You have been a spectator cheering for my abusers as long as they kept your wineglass full." Beatrice's expression hardened, her maternal mask slipping to reveal the cold, opportunistic woman underneath. "I pushed you to be exceptional, Maya." She snapped, her tone sharpening into the familiar scolding voice that had dominated my childhood. "I knew you did not have your sister's delicate looks or her effortless social grace, so I made sure you developed a ruthless work ethic. Everything you have achieved is because I refused to coddle you. You should be thanking me on your knees for building your character instead of throwing a childish tantrum. I did what I had to do to prepare you for the real world. You are a chief executive officer today because I made you tough." She stood taller, attempting to regain her unearned authority, in a house she did not own, relying on the same toxic guilt trips that used to paralyze me. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I simply reached into my coat pocket and retrieved a single folded sheet of paper. I held it out between two fingers. "You did not make me tough, Beatrice." I corrected her, my tone completely hollow. "You made me profitable, and your profit margin just expired." She hesitated before snatching the paper from my hand. She unfolded it quickly, her eyes scanning the neat rows of printed text. It was the latest statement for the private allowance account I had maintained for her over the last 8 years. Her brow furrowed in genuine confusion as she read the bold number printed at the bottom of the page. "A zero balance," she whispered, her hands beginning to tremble uncontrollably. "What is this, Maya? Where are my funds?" The scheduled transfer was supposed to clear yesterday morning. I watched the realization wash over her features as the gravity of her situation finally hit home. "I closed the account," I explained flatly. "I canceled the black card, I revoked your access to the family trust, and I liquidated the emergency fund. There was no banking error. You are entirely cut off. The money that funded your country club memberships, your spa weekends, and your designer wardrobe is gone. You enabled the man who was bleeding my company dry, and you happily mocked me while doing it. You chose your side a long time ago when you let Chloe steal my college tuition. Now you get to live with the consequences of that choice. Beatrice's face turned a mottled shade of crimson. You cannot do this to me, she shrieked, her voice breaking into a hysterical pitch that echoed off the high ceilings. I am your mother. You owe me respect. I brought you into this world. I gave you everything. You are an ungrateful, selfish little brat who is going to end up completely alone. She crumpled the bank statement and threw it at my feet, her chest heaving with exertion. Chloe wailed, covering her ears as her mother completely unraveled. I stood perfectly still, letting her pathetic outburst wash over me, without feeling a single ounce of guilt or obligation. The woman standing before me was a stranger, a parasite who had finally been severed from her host. I slowly turned my head and met the steady gaze of my lead security contractor, who had been waiting silently by the perimeter of the room. I raised my hand, giving him the final signal. Elias, I said, my voice slicing through the heavy air with lethal precision. Escort them upstairs. You have exactly 30 minutes to pack your things and vacate my corporate property. Elias moved with the swift, silent efficiency of a predator. He stepped between me and the two women, gesturing toward the grand marble staircase with a gloved hand. The security contractors formed an impenetrable wall behind him, leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. Beatrice opened her mouth to launch another venomous tirade, but the cold stare from Elias immediately silenced her. He tapped the heavy chronograph watch on his wrist. 29 minutes, ladies. Elias announced, his voice devoid of any human empathy. I highly suggest you prioritize the essentials because anything left behind will be incinerated tomorrow morning. Panic finally shattered the last remnants of their aristocratic delusions. Chloe let out a strangled gasp and bolted toward the stairs, her expensive silk gown tangling around her knees as she scrambled upward. Beatrice followed close behind, her previous matriarchal dignity dissolving into a clumsy, desperate sprint. I walked leisurely into the gourmet kitchen, poured myself a fresh cup of dark roast coffee, and strolled up the winding staircase to supervise the eviction. I was not going to miss the grand finale of this lifelong theatrical production. I had paid too high a price for my ticket. When I reached the second-floor landing, the frantic sounds of destruction echoed down the vaulted hallway. Drawers were being yanked open and slammed shut with violent force. Hangers scraped aggressively against metal closet rods. I stepped into the doorway of the primary guest suite. The room looked like the epicenter of a localized hurricane. Chloe was wildly throwing designer dresses, velvet shoes, and imported cosmetics into a massive leather trunk. She was sobbing hysterically, her breath hitching in loud, erratic gasps as she tried to force 3 heavy winter coats into a bag that was already bursting at the seams. Beatrice barged into the room, her arms overflowing with cashmere sweaters and delicate silk scarves. She dumped her pile onto Chloe's bed and immediately began rummaging through her daughter's massive jewelry box. What are you doing? Chloe shrieked, slapping her mother's hands away from the velvet-lined mahogany case. Those are my pieces. Put them back right now. Beatrice sneered, clutching a thick diamond tennis bracelet tightly to her chest. You are married to a federal criminal, Chloe. The government is going to seize everything you own by tomorrow morning. I am securing these assets for our survival. You owe me for ruining my peaceful retirement. You ruined your own retirement, you selfish old hag! Chloe screamed, her face turning a violent shade of purple. You are the one who gave him the account passwords. You are the one who signed away your identity because you wanted to brag to your wealthy country club friends about your brilliant entrepreneur son-in-law. Do not you dare try to steal my jewelry to pay for your monumental stupidity. The facade of their picture, perfect mother-daughter bond, incinerated instantly right before my eyes. The deep, unconditional love they had constantly flaunted to make me feel inadequate was nothing but a fragile alliance built on shared greed. Now that the money was gone, the alliance was completely dead. Beatrice lunged forward, grabbing the handle of a pristine Himalayan crocodile Birkin bag that sat displayed on the mirrored dressing table. I had purchased that exact bag for Chloe's 30th birthday after working a brutal 90-hour week to secure a major corporate merger. I am taking this bag, Beatrice declared, her knuckles turning white as she yanked the heavy leather strap. It is worth at least $80,000 on the resale market. I need the liquid capital to hire a premium defense attorney because of your idiot husband. Let go of it, Chloe shrieked, grabbing the other side of the bag and digging her high heels deep into the thick wool carpet. It belongs to me. You have your own bags in your own room. They engaged in a vicious, pathetic tug of war over the designer purse. Beatrice yanked violently to the left, Chloe jerked violently to the right. The two women who had spent my entire childhood lecturing me about elegance, poise, and high society manners were now physically wrestling like feral animals over a piece of dyed leather. They cursed at each other, spitting venomous insults that exposed decades of hidden resentment and mutual exploitation. Beatrice called Chloe a spoiled, useless trophy wife who could not survive a single day in the real world. Chloe called Beatrice an enabling, narcissistic parasite who only loved people for their bank accounts. The heavy seams of the Birkin bag let out a loud, terrible tearing sound. The reinforced handles snapped entirely under the immense pressure. Beatrice lost her balance and tumbled backward, crashing hard into the mirrored vanity. The thick glass shattered instantly, sending sharp, silvery fragments cascading over the plush carpet. Chloe stumbled forward, clutching the torn, ruined bag tightly to her chest. She looked down at the destroyed leather and let out a guttural wail of pure agony, as if she had just lost a newborn child. I leaned casually against the wooden doorframe, taking a slow, deliberate sip of my black coffee. The dark liquid burned pleasantly against the back of my throat, warming me from the inside out. I watched them tear each other apart over material goods that I had financed. For 30 years, they had intentionally made me feel like a total outsider in my own family. They had weaponized their exclusive bond to isolate me. They had nearly convinced me that I was fundamentally unlovable and unworthy of basic respect. But looking at them now, bleeding and weeping over a ruined purse, I realized they did not know how to love at all. They only knew how to consume and destroy. The heavy weight of generational trauma that had crushed my shoulders for 3 decades simply evaporated into the cool night air. I did not feel angry anymore. I did not feel bitter or sad or rejected. I felt completely, overwhelmingly light. The toxic spell was permanently broken. They were no longer the powerful matriarch and the flawless golden child. They were just two desperate, greedy strangers fighting over the miserable scraps of a lie. Elias stepped up beside me, his massive frame filling the entire doorway. He checked his heavy watch and looked down at the two women groveling among the broken glass and scattered clothes. "Time is up," he announced, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "Drop the bags and walk toward the exit immediately. If you attempt to take anything else, I will have you arrested for theft of corporate property." Beatrice looked up from the floor, her face smeared with sweat and genuine panic. Chloe clutched the ruined bag, refusing to let go. But Elias signaled his men, and the security contractors moved in, grabbing them by their arms and marching them forcefully down the hallway. I took another slow sip of my coffee, enjoying the profound, absolute silence that finally settled over my home. The timer on Elias' heavy tactical watch beeped with a sharp mechanical chirp, signaling the absolute end of their 30-minute grace period. My security team operated with military efficiency, completely immune to the dramatic wailing echoing down the corridor. Because Chloe had successfully destroyed her only piece of functional luggage during her violent tug of war, Elias calmly presented her with the only alternative available. He dropped a roll of thick black contractor garbage bags onto the hardwood floor. The heavy industrial plastic hit the ground with a dull thud. "You must be joking," Beatrice gasped, her hands flying to her pearl necklace. "We are not stuffing our belongings into trash bags like common vagrants. We are accustomed to Louis Vuitton and Goyard. You cannot subject us to this indignity." Elias did not even blink. He unrolled a bag, snapped it open with a loud pop, and handed it to my mother. "You have 60 seconds to fill it, or you leave empty-handed," he stated, his tone leaving absolutely zero room for negotiation. The sheer terror of losing the rest of her hoarded treasures finally overpowered Beatrice's aristocratic pride. She dropped to her knees and frantically began shoving her cashmere sweaters and silk blouses into the black plastic. Chloe followed suit, openly weeping as her expensive designer shoes tumbled into the bottom of a garbage bag. Downstairs, the scene was equally chaotic. The junior analyst who had been sharing my husband's bed was being escorted out of the home office. Her earlier arrogance was entirely gone, replaced by streaks of ruined mascara and a trembling lower lip. She clutched a cheap cardboard box filled with her personal desk items, looking like a terrified child who had just been caught stealing. Bradley, my deceitful brother-in-law, was huddled near the front entrance, his face pale and slick with nervous sweat. He was desperately scrolling through his phone, likely looking for a lawyer or a friend who would take him in. But rats tend to abandon a sinking ship, and Bradley was rapidly discovering that his vast social network was entirely superficial. "Move," Elias commanded, pointing toward the grand double doors. The procession that followed was the most profoundly satisfying spectacle of my entire life. Beatrice and Chloe struggled to carry their overstuffed garbage bags, the heavy plastic stretching and groaning under the weight of their greed. They dragged the bags across the polished marble foyer, leaving faint scuff marks that my housekeeping staff would easily erase tomorrow. I stood on the landing watching them struggle under the physical weight of their own materialism. For decades, they had treated me like a pack mule, forcing me to carry the burden of their financial mistakes and emotional manipulation. Now they were finally carrying their own trash. "Maya, please." Beatrice stopped at the threshold, her voice cracking as she turned to face me one last time. "You cannot send us out into the cold. Think of what people will say. Think of the family reputation." "That is exactly what I am thinking about," I replied, stepping forward so she could see the absolute resolve in my eyes. "I am protecting my reputation from you. Get off my property." The heavy oak doors swung open, revealing the biting chill of the winter night. The gravel driveway stretched out before them, long and unforgiving. The flashing red and blue lights from the earlier federal raid had drawn a significant crowd. In our exclusive gated community, gossip was the ultimate currency. The wealthy neighbors had abandoned their warm mansions and gathered at the edge of the wrought iron gates, wrapping themselves in designer winter coats to watch the unprecedented spectacle. They held their glowing smartphones up, capturing every humiliating second of the eviction. Beatrice froze on this front step, the black garbage bag slipping from her grasp. Her entire identity was built on projecting an image of flawless generational wealth. Seeing her country club peers whispering and pointing their cameras at her was a fate worse than death. She tried to hide her face behind her hands, but the harsh glare of the security floodlights illuminated her completely. Chloe fared no better. She stumbled down the porch steps, her high heels sinking into the frosty gravel, dragging her plastic sack of belongings while the neighbors openly stared. The golden child who had spent her entire life seeking admiration was now the star of a public tragedy. Bradley saw an opening and immediately sprinted toward the driveway. He bypassed his weeping wife, completely ignoring Chloe as she struggled with her heavy bags. Self-preservation was his only true skill. He fumbled in his tailored slacks and pulled out the keys to his pristine silver Porsche Panamera. The luxury sports car was parked near the fountain, gleaming under the exterior lights. It was the ultimate symbol of his fabricated success, a vehicle he had leased using fraudulent income streams tied directly to my company. He unlocked the doors, the headlights flashing with a cheerful chirp. "I am leaving, Chloe," he shouted over his shoulder, not even looking back at the woman he had promised to love and cherish. "You are on your own." He grabbed the driver's side door handle, a triumphant smirk briefly crossing his face as he thought he had successfully escaped the carnage. He pulled the handle, but the door refused to budge. He frowned, yanking it harder, hitting the unlock button on his key fob frantically. The deafening blast of a heavy air horn shattered the cold night air. A massive flatbed tow truck aggressively backed into the driveway, its reverse lights casting long yellow shadows across the gravel. The truck maneuvered with practiced precision, completely blocking the silver Porsche from the exit. A burly driver stepped out of the cab holding a metal clipboard and a set of heavy chains. Bradley spun around, his face draining of all remaining color. "Hey!" he yelled, waving his arms frantically. "What are you doing? You cannot take my car. This is a private driveway." I stepped out onto the front portico, pulling my wool coat tighter against the chill. The tow truck driver looked past Bradley and gave me a respectful nod. I had made the phone call exactly 45 minutes ago while the federal agents were reading Marcus his Miranda rights. I knew Bradley relied entirely on a corporate lease agreement that I had personally co-signed years ago to keep up family appearances. "Actually, Bradley," I called out, my voice projecting clearly across the freezing driveway, "I canceled the corporate lease on that vehicle an hour ago. You failed to make the last 3 payments, and I am certainly not subsidizing your luxury lifestyle while you face impending federal indictment." The bank authorized an immediate repossession on the spot. Bradley stood frozen as the heavy steel chains of the tow truck rattled against the frozen gravel. His jaw worked silently, but no words came out. The aggressive amber flashing lights of the commercial rig painted his panicked face in alternating strokes of pale yellow and deep shadow. He watched helplessly as the hydraulic winch engaged, pulling his pristine leased Porsche up the steep incline of the flatbed. The scraping of the luxury tires against the grooved metal ramp sounded like a dying beast. Without his car, without the artificial shield of corporate wealth, he was suddenly just a weak man standing in the cold in a ruined designer suit. He did not look back at his weeping wife or his disgraced mother-in-law. He simply turned up his coat collar, shoved his hands deep into his pockets, and began a brisk, humiliated jog down the edge of the driveway, desperate to escape the blinding glare of my security floodlights. Chloe and Beatrice were left completely alone to face the long, unforgiving march toward the perimeter. The expansive circular driveway, which had always served as a grand stage for our lavish holiday parties, now transformed into a brutal gauntlet. Every step they took, crunching loudly against the frost-covered stones, amplified their profound disgrace. Beatrice struggled to maintain her grip on the slick black plastic of her contractor bag. Her expensive silk scarf slipped from her shoulders, dragging through the freezing mud. She hissed at Chloe to help her, but the golden child was entirely consumed by her own tragedy. Chloe was weeping openly, her makeup running in dark, jagged streaks down her cheeks, clutching her torn Birkin bag against her chest like a shield that could no longer protect her. The audience of wealthy neighbors pressed closer to the towering wrought iron gates. These were the elite socialites Beatrice had spent 3 decades desperately trying to impress. The country club presidents, the charity gala chairwomen, the corporate spouses who dictated local high society. They stood shoulder to shoulder in the bitter cold, holding their smartphones high over the iron bars, their screens glowing in the darkness, as they recorded every agonizing second of the eviction. A low murmur of vicious whispers rippled through the crowd. I could hear snippets of their conversations carrying across the manicured lawn. They were already dismantling Beatrice's social standing piece by piece, stripping away her carefully constructed facade and exposing the fraudulent reality underneath. The plastic seam of Chloe's garbage bag caught on a sharp piece of decorative landscaping stone. The thin industrial material ripped open with a loud, terrible tear, spilling a cascade of expensive cosmetics, velvet shoe bags, and silk undergarments directly into a frozen puddle. Chloe dropped to her knees, letting out a sharp, pathetic cry. She frantically scrambled in the mud, trying to scrape her luxury items out of the freezing, dirty water. Beatrice did not stop to help her daughter. The matriarch simply adjusted her grip on her own heavy sack and continued marching, her breath pluming in white clouds of exhaustion. The physical toll of carrying her own weight for the very first time in her life was visibly destroying her. I remained standing on the elevated marble portico, completely immune to the freezing wind. My posture was relaxed, my hands resting comfortably in the deep pockets of my wool coat. I watched the 2 women who had engineered my lifelong emotional isolation finally reach the end of the line. The heavy wrought iron gates stood open, waiting to expel them into the street. The crowd of neighbors parted slightly, creating a narrow, humiliating corridor for them to pass through. The absolute finality of the moment suddenly struck Beatrice. She stopped just inches from the property line, her shoulders heaving, her knuckles white as bone where she gripped the black plastic. The realization that she was permanently losing access to my wealth, my estate, and my protection snapped the last fragile thread of her sanity. She dropped her heavy garbage bag, letting it hit the asphalt with a heavy thud. She spun around to face me, her features contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. She ignored the dozens of cameras pointed directly at her face. She ignored the whispering socialites she had previously worshipped. "You think you have won?" "Maya," Beatrice screamed, her voice raw and jagged, tearing through the quiet winter night. "You think this money makes you powerful. You are nothing but a cold, bitter shell of a woman. You have chased away your husband, you have destroyed your sister, and you are throwing your own mother into the street. You are going to die alone in this massive, empty house. You will die completely alone and miserable because you have no family left. Nobody will ever love you." Her venomous words, which would have paralyzed me just 24 hours ago, simply dissolved into the freezing air. They carried no weight. They held no power. The crowd of neighbors fell deathly silent, waiting with bated breath for my reaction. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice in anger. I stood tall on the top step and let my response ring out with absolute crystal-clear authority, ensuring that every single person present heard exactly where I stood. "I would rather be alone in a mansion I own than surrounded by parasites in a house I stole," I stated firmly. Beatrice's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The sheer blunt force of the truth struck her completely silent. Chloe finally reached the gate, her arms full of muddy, ruined clothes, her face buried in her chest to hide her ultimate shame. She bumped into her mother, physically pushing Beatrice across the property line and out onto the public street. I raised my hand and gave Elias the final signal. The massive electronic motors hummed to life. The towering wrought iron gates began their slow, heavy sweep inward. The heavy steel bars glided smoothly across the track, separating my world from theirs. Beatrice lunged forward as if she might try to force her way back inside, but the gap was already too narrow. She stood on the sidewalk watching helplessly as the imposing black gates met in the center. The heavy magnetic lock engaged with a loud, resounding metallic click that echoed across the entire estate. The barrier was completely impenetrable. They were visually, legally, and metaphorically locked out of my life forever. The neighbors slowly lowered their phones, the spectacle finally over. I turned my back on the whispering crowd, the flashing police lights in the distance, and the two women shivering on the curb. I walked back into my warm, quiet home and firmly shut the heavy oak doors behind me, stepping into a bright future that finally belonged entirely to me alone. The morning after the raid, my corporate attorneys descended upon Vanguard Financial like a swarm of locusts. They spent the next 6 months systematically dismantling the fraudulent architecture my ex-husband had so clumsily constructed. Marcus' federal trial was a media spectacle that I attended only once, strictly to deliver my victim impact statement. He sat at the defense table wearing an ill-fitting gray suit stripped of his arrogant swagger. The prosecution presented an airtight case built entirely on the offshore transaction records I had provided. When the judge handed down a 15-year sentence without the possibility of early parole, Marcus visibly collapsed. He wept openly in the courtroom, begging the magistrate for leniency, citing his previous standing in the community. The gavel slammed down, silencing his pathetic pleas forever. He was transferred to a maximum security facility in upstate New York where his Ivy League pedigree and country club connections meant absolutely nothing. I signed the finalized divorce papers the very same afternoon, severing my legal ties to a convicted felon and reclaiming complete ownership of my assets. The junior analyst who had foolishly believed she could usurp my position faced an equally brutal reckoning. My legal team filed a massive civil suit against her for corporate espionage and breach of fiduciary duty. She attempted to play the victim, claiming Marcus had manipulated her into accessing confidential company accounts. The judge was completely unmoved by her artificial tears. She was hit with devastating civil penalties that wiped out her savings and plunged her deeply into debt. Worse than the financial ruin was the professional execution. I ensured that a comprehensive dossier of her ethical violations was circulated to every major financial institution on the Eastern Seaboard. She was officially blacklisted from the corporate industry. No reputable firm would even grant her an interview. The woman who had sneered at me from my own living room sofa was permanently relegated to the absolute bottom rung of the employment ladder, her promising career entirely annihilated by her own blinding greed. Bradley suffered a remarkably similar fate. His cowardly attempt to abandon his wife and flee the estate had only delayed the inevitable. The federal agents who raided my home had seized his laptop and personal ledgers during their sweep. Those devices contained a treasure trove of tax evasion schemes, undocumented shell companies, and fraudulent write-offs. The Internal Revenue Service moved with terrifying speed. Bradley was formally indicted on 7 counts of tax fraud and money laundering. The government seized his remaining bank accounts, froze his investment portfolios, and placed a lien on every single piece of property he claimed to own. He tried to negotiate a plea deal by throwing Marcus under the bus, but the prosecution already had everything they needed. He was facing a decade behind bars and forced into bankruptcy. His vast network of wealthy friends instantly evaporated. The men he used to golf with refused to take his calls, and the socialites who had once attended his lavish parties pretended they had never met him. The ultimate poetic justice, however, was reserved for my mother and sister. Their descent from the peak of high society was swift and uncompromising. Without my corporate income to fund their extravagant lifestyles, and with their husbands facing federal prison, they were left completely destitute. The luxury vehicles were repossessed. Their designer wardrobes were liquidated to pay off mounting legal fees. Stripped of their wealth and their social armor, Beatrice and Chloe were forced to face the harsh reality of the real world they had spent decades avoiding. I hired a private investigator to keep tabs on them, purely for my own peace of mind. He provided me with weekly updates that I read with profound satisfaction. They had relocated to a cramped, run-down apartment complex on the outskirts of the city. The building featured peeling paint, flickering hallway lights, and a broken security gate. It was a staggering downgrade from the sprawling mansions and gated communities they believed they deserved. Survival required capital, and neither woman possessed a single marketable skill. Chloe, the former pageant queen who had never worked a day in her life, was forced to take a minimum wage job as a cashier at a local discount retail store. She spent her days scanning cheap merchandise and bagging plastic items for angry customers, her perfectly manicured hands ruined by harsh cleaning chemicals. Beatrice fared even worse. The proud matriarch who had once terrorized country club waiters was now working the early morning shift at a commercial laundry facility. She spent 8 hours a day standing on her feet sorting stained linens and breathing in the heavy scent of industrial bleach. The generational pride they had wielded like a weapon was entirely annihilated. They were finally forced to labor for their own survival, completely forgotten by the world they had worshipped. Sometimes, on quiet Sunday mornings, I would sit on the terrace of my grand estate, sipping my dark roast coffee and reflecting on the incredible journey that had brought me here. I had shed the toxic weight of my abusers and rebuilt a life founded on actual merit and genuine strength. Vanguard Financial continued to thrive under my undisputed leadership, breaking revenue records quarter after quarter. I surrounded myself with a dedicated team of loyal professionals who respected my vision and matched my relentless work ethic. The massive vaulted living room where my family had once gathered to mock my ambition was now filled with brilliant, authentic people who genuinely cared for me. I had successfully orchestrated the ultimate retribution simply by exposing the truth and letting gravity do the rest. My mother and sister were trapped in a miserable cage of their own making while I was entirely free. The generational curse was officially broken, leaving me standing victorious at the absolute pinnacle of my empire. I had survived the fire and forged a magnificent, unstoppable future that belonged only to me alone. The silence of my estate was a stark contrast to the predatory hum of the Vanguard Financial boardroom the following Tuesday. I sat at the head of the long mahogany table observing the 12 board members assembled before me. This was the first official quarterly meeting since the merger that solidified my mega corporation, and the air crackled with unspoken tension. The room smelled of expensive cologne leather and fear. Several of the older male executives who had comfortably coasted under the previous leadership regime were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. They viewed me as a temporary anomaly. In their outdated minds, a woman fresh out of a highly publicized divorce and a scandalous family eviction was emotionally fragile and fundamentally unfit to steer a multi-billion-dollar empire. Arthur Pendleton, the senior vice president of acquisitions, cleared his throat and adjusted his silk tie. He was the unofficial leader of the old guard, a man who had spent the last decade collecting massive bonuses while contributing absolutely zero innovation to our portfolio. He folded his hands precisely over his leather folder, preparing to deliver what he clearly thought was a fatal blow to my authority. Maya, we all sympathize with your recent personal upheavals. Arthur began, his tone dripping with patronizing concern. He looked around the table, gathering silent support from his peers. Going through a messy public divorce is taxing for anyone. The media circus surrounding your estate must be incredibly draining. Because of these unfortunate distractions, the board feels it would be prudent to delay your proposed restructuring plan indefinitely. We need steady, experienced hands on the wheel right now, not emotional overhauls driven by personal stress. A few of his cronies nodded in agreement, their smug expressions signaling a coordinated ambush. They genuinely believed my private trials had weakened my professional armor. They thought my recent battles had left me bleeding and vulnerable. They had absolutely no idea I was the one holding the knife. I did not raise my voice or show a single ounce of the vulnerability they were desperately hoping to exploit. I let a long, heavy silence stretch across the room, forcing them to sit in their own manufactured arrogance. Then I tapped a button on my tablet, and the massive digital screen behind me flickered to life, displaying a complex web of financial analytics. I am fascinated by your definition of steady, experienced hands, Arthur, I said smoothly, my voice echoing off the glass walls. Let us review the steady performance of your acquisitions department over the past 4 quarters. The screen shifted to a glaring red graph, highlighting a catastrophic 40% drop in yield across his specific sector. You have been quietly funneling corporate capital into dying brick-and-mortar retail spaces managed by your college fraternity brothers, I stated, pointing a laser pen at the damning numbers. While our competitors were pivoting to emerging tech and green energy infrastructures, you locked our capital in obsolete strip malls. You are not cautious, Arthur. You are a liability. The color drained from his face as the undeniable metrics glared down at him in high definition. He sputtered, adjusting his tie nervously, trying to formulate a defense, but I cut him off completely. Your concern for my emotional state is touching but entirely misplaced. I continued, standing up and resting my palms flat against the cool mahogany table. My personal life has never once clouded my financial judgment. In fact, eliminating parasitic dead weight at home has only sharpened my focus on eliminating dead weight in this company. Arthur opened his mouth to protest loudly, but I signaled my lead legal counsel, who stood quietly in the corner. She immediately stepped forward and distributed thick manila folders directly to Arthur and his 3 most vocal supporters. The heavy thud of the files hitting the table sounded like a judge slamming a gavel. Those folders contain your severance packages, along with detailed forensic audits of your gross financial mismanagement, I announced, the room falling deathly silent. If you attempt to contest this termination or demand a golden parachute, I will happily make these audits public. I will let the federal regulators investigate your frat house investments, and you can explain your steady hands to a grand jury. You have exactly 10 minutes to clear out your offices. The old guard crumbled instantly. Arthur stood up, his hands shaking violently as he dropped his expensive pen onto the table. He did not utter another word. He simply turned and walked out the door, his cronies trailing behind him like defeated, disgraced foot soldiers. I watched them leave, feeling a profound sense of satisfaction. I looked at the remaining board members, their faces pale and wide-eyed with shock. I am restructuring this board effective immediately, I declared, taking my seat and smoothing my blazer. We are promoting based on ruthless efficiency, forward-thinking innovation, and absolute loyalty to the bottom line. Old boys clubs are officially bankrupt in this building. Does anyone else have concerns regarding my emotional stability? Not a single person breathed. The remaining executives shook their heads in rapid unison. My absolute authority over the industry was permanently cemented in that silent room. I had proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that I was completely untouchable. The meeting adjourned with unprecedented speed and terrifying efficiency. I retreated to the pristine quiet of my corner office, overlooking the sprawling city skyline. My assistant silently entered, placing a single red leather folder on the center of my glass desk before bowing out. It was the final piece of corporate housekeeping required to completely sanitize my empire. The documents inside detailed the complete immediate liquidation of the International Trade Division. That was the specific department Marcus had built the professional playground where he had embezzled funds and entertained his junior analyst mistresses. I picked up my favorite gold fountain pen and smoothly signed my name on the dotted line. The ink dried instantly, sealing the fate of his entire professional history. I was not just erasing his fraudulent wealth, I was completely obliterating his legacy from the corporate world forever. The heavy oak door of my office closed with a muted click, leaving the corporate battlefield behind me. I took the private elevator down to the garage. The drive from the glass skyscrapers of the city to the rugged coastal cliffs of Rhode Island took under 3 hours. I watched the urban sprawl dissolve into pine forests and coastal roads. My Range Rover hugged the sharp curves effortlessly, the engine humming a steady rhythm. For the first time in 33 years, my shoulders dropped. The chronic tension that had gripped my spine melted away into the heated leather seat. I rolled down the window, letting the salty air whip through my hair. The oppressive weight of proving my worth to people who fundamentally despised me vanished. I pulled into the crushed seashell driveway of my hidden sanctuary. The beach house stood exactly as my grandfather had left it, a sprawling structure of weathered cedar shingles and massive floor-to-ceiling windows facing the untamed Atlantic Ocean. It was the only property I owned that carried absolutely zero tainted history. No greedy relatives had ever set foot across this threshold. No deceitful ex-husband had ever poured himself a drink in this kitchen. This house represented the ultimate safety net my grandfather envisioned for me. It was a tangible manifestation of unconditional love. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the sunlit living room. The hardwood floors gleamed under the late afternoon light, and the smell of sea salt calmed my racing mind. I walked slowly toward the bay windows overlooking the crashing waves, pulling my smartphone from my pocket. The screen illuminated, displaying a perfectly clear notification center. Out of sheer curiosity, I opened my settings and scrolled down to the blocked contacts list. It was a comprehensive digital graveyard of my former life. Beatrice was there along with Chloe and Marcus. Bradley was blocked alongside every toxic extended relative who had ever demanded a handout while whispering insults behind my back. The endless requests for bridging loans, the manipulative guilt trips about family loyalty, the midnight emergencies that were always their own fault were completely silenced. I had successfully severed the parasitic pipeline that had drained my energy and my bank accounts for over a decade. In corporate finance, we often discuss bad debt, but the most dangerous liability any successful person can carry is the emotional extortion demanded by toxic relatives. For years, I had been paying an exorbitant black tax. I had financed their luxury cars, subsidized their designer wardrobes, and funded their lavish vacations, hoping to purchase a fraction of the maternal affection Chloe received for free. I had believed that if I just worked hard enough, I would eventually earn my seat at their table. Looking at that blocked list, I realized I never needed a seat at their table. I owned the entire building. The silence emanating from my phone was not a sign of isolation. It was the beautiful sound of absolute, unadulterated peace. I slid the glass door open and stepped out onto the wooden deck. The freezing winter wind bit at my cheeks, but I welcomed the harsh, stinging sensation. It made me feel incredibly alive. I closed my eyes and took a deep, steadying breath, filling my lungs with the clean ocean air. The crushing expectations, the constant disrespect, the endless cycle of performance and punishment were gone. I was no longer the inadequate scapegoat or the convenient automated teller machine. I was just Maya. I listened to the rhythmic pounding of the gray waves against the jagged coastal rocks, feeling deeply anchored to the earth. The ocean did not care about social standing. It was wild, powerful, and completely unapologetic. A soft melodic chime broke the natural symphony of the coast. I glanced down at my phone, fully expecting a mundane notification regarding tomorrow's schedule. Instead, the screen displayed a FaceTime request from David, my newly appointed chief operating officer, and one of the few people who had stood unwaveringly by my side. I swiped the green icon, accepting the call. David filled the screen, smiling broadly from his bustling home kitchen. The cheerful chaos of domestic life played out behind him. His husband was laughing while pulling a massive roasting pan out of the oven, and their two golden retrievers were happily wrestling on the tile floor. It was a scene of genuine chaotic warmth. Maya, I hope I am not interrupting your coastal retreat, David said, his eyes crinkling with genuine warmth. I know you plan to spend the weekend reading financial reports and ignoring humanity. I smiled, leaning against the wooden railing. You know me too well, David. What can I do for you? He wiped a smudge of flour off his apron before responding. We are hosting our annual holiday dinner this Sunday. Nothing fancy, just good food, terrible wine, and people we actually like. A few senior team members are coming over, and we strictly forbid any discussion regarding quarterly projections. We want you here, Maya. There is a seat at our table with your name on it. The invitation hung in the crisp air, simple and profound. There was absolutely no hidden agenda lurking beneath his friendly smile. David did not want a corporate loan or a lucrative promotion. He simply wanted my company for the evening. For 33 long and painful years, I had foolishly chased the illusion of family, mistaking shared genetics for genuine loyalty. Looking at David's smiling face, I finally understood that true family is entirely elective and beautifully earned. I would love to come, David, I replied, my voice authentic and completely steady. I disconnected the call and quietly watched the magnificent sunset paint the sky in brilliant strokes of violet and gold. I was 33 years old, incredibly wealthy, and absolutely untouchable. I had survived the raging fire, and for the first time in my entire life, I was truly and completely happy.